Where are the slides? Could you give me the slides, please? And after the general discussion on the topics presented this morning and this afternoon. So, Matthias and Michel, I give you the hand.
Thank you, Philip. Hello, nice to see you back. So let's start immediately. We have a delay anyway, but we will catch up because the last speaker is not here. But the speaker who is here is An. An is coming actually, is born in Belgium, but I have to say she lived most of the time. She left most of the time in Africa, where she worked for more than 20 years on tropical livestock systems with a very specific focus on livestock environmental interactions. And then is currently coordinating the activities of the Tropical Forage Program and the Alliance of Biodiversity International at CIAT. It's a great pleasure to have you here, An. The floor is yours. Please start.
Thank you very much for that nice welcome, and thank you everybody to come back after the coffee and the nice snacks again. So let me get this presentation started. Yes. So today I will talk a little bit about the use of cultivated tropical forages and how to integrate it in crop tree livestock systems and support an agroecological transformation. The advantage of being not the first presenter is that probably a lot of the things I will say you will have heard before, so it will be easy to follow. Hopefully also I will still be able to give a slightly different twist to it. So I think we know by now, anyway, we all know anyway, that in our world today we are really facing a complex set of challenges, including poverty, inequality, food and nutrition security, and at the same time this triple whammy of environmental problems, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And I think there is, amongst many of us, a growing sense of urgency to tackle these. And this slide is then really just to kind of make the case for looking at the food systems as one of the solution spaces when we look at that set of interrelated problems. Food systems are really very important for people. About 40% of the population really works in agriculture, so it is the single largest employer in the world. It contributes significantly to GDP, globally only 4%, but in some other countries, especially low-income countries, this can go up to 25 or even 50%. And of course, it also has a significant footprint. And the same counts then for livestock within that food system. It's really, livestock is an integral part of the food system. And again, it's really important, the livestock sector is really important for people in terms of employment and income, but also food and nutrition security, and in many places also for resilience, for risk management, and obviously it also has a cultural value. But it is also having its impact on the planet. In positive terms, it contributes manure, it can help with soil carbon and energy, but it is also the biggest land user. I'm not the first one to mention that today. So livestock uses a lot of land, which comes with an opportunity cost. That same land could also be used for carbon storage, for food production, or for biodiversity, for wild habitat. Livestock is also responsible for quite a serious portion of the water use. It causes pollution, it can contribute to land degradation and as such to loss of flora and fauna. Greenhouse gas emissions, there was a whole session this morning, so I don't need to talk about that. So basically the bottom line is that sustainability is an issue and it needs to be managed. But we need to do this really without compromising the good, because as I said, a lot of people actually depend on livestock production. So in terms of land use, I'm thinking, for example, on we have to increase the land productivity so that we can try and get as much out of that land as possible and reduce the opportunity cost. But there is also really a role for targeting, using land for feed production that is not necessarily the best for other roles. And in terms of water pollution, degradation, we also really need to look at resource use efficiency and land restoration. So if we look at the solution space within the sustainable food systems, I think most people agree that we have like 3 broad categories of interventions. So we can really work on more sustainable agricultural production. We might have to look at shifting diets, consumption, and of course, also has been mentioned a few times already, the reduction of waste and food loss. So I'm not going to really talk about 2 and 3 too much today, so I'll focus more on the solution space, or option 1 there. And I think you hear more and more terms like sustainable intensification, nature-based solutions, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, climate-smart agriculture. That is where I will be looking at, and more specifically at some livestock-specific solutions there. So we're really trying to look at efficient meat and milk production, and not so much about the shifting of the diets, which is obviously also something that needs to happen. So in general, we really need to work on all 3 of these options, I think, but I will zoom in a little bit on more efficient meat and milk production, which really is something that I think we've heard a lot of options already today. And just the case I wanted to make now is that it's a kind of a context-specific, we need context-specific solutions because it really depends very much on the livestock production system that we are dealing with. Again, previous speakers have mentioned some of these systems before. But in the global south, where I'm really kind of where my perspective is from, because as Matthias said, I've been living there for almost 25 years now, most of the livestock production really happens in family farms. And they take different forms. So you have the more pastoral grazing systems, and you have, which are vast in area, but not necessarily so dense in production, in livestock numbers and production. And the largest production really happens in the mixed crop 3 livestock systems. As the markets develop, as there is more market pull, we see also more and more specialization of these farms. We've seen some pictures of feedlots. Some are also a little less industrialized, I would say, so have put their semi-specialized systems, but it's often the systems where the land and the animal is now decoupled. So there is really a need to kind of compensate for that with interventions. So these different systems offer different opportunities or have different strengths, but also have different footprints. The pastoral systems, often they are in areas not suitable for food production, so there is in general low food feed competition. They've often co-evolved with the natural environment. So there is, in general, quite high biodiversity and lots of opportunity for carbon sequestration. At the same time, as we've heard already also, at times overgrazed, and in terms of productivity, quite low, so also in terms of emission intensity, high. And then the mixed crop livestock systems, which are really important in terms of production and sustaining many families, really make use of this circularity of really integrating the crop and the livestock, and in case of integration of trees, also offer some opportunity for carbon sequestration. The nutrient cycles are often there, the use of byproducts, the crop residues were mentioned, and then also the livestock in support of the crop production. So lots of opportunities there, but yeah, also a lot of opportunity to increase the productivity. In general, in the Global South, those mixed farms are low to medium high in productivity, I would say. And often this is really one of the main constraints is actually getting enough feed for the animals. And that's the case I wanted to make today, is that there is really opportunity to intervene in such integrated systems in terms of cultivating improved forages in those systems. Those forages are high productive in terms of feed quality, also in terms of biomass production. Often also they're perennial crops often, so they're also very good for the soil and the soil organic carbon and the soil life, actually, so the below ground biodiversity. There are many different types of forages. Often we think grasses, we've already heard about legumes, and of course there are also sometimes forage shrubs and trees. And I really do want to mention that when we talk about forages, there is a vast agrobiodiversity that we can actually tap into. And here you see a picture of the gene bank that the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT is managing. And it contains about 23,000 accessions of tropical forages, just to say that there is a huge diversity we can tap into. It's not just the one grass that we hear about sometimes. In terms of improving those forages, there are different options we have been applying also at the Alliance. And we talk about selection as well as breeding. So we can also, from those accessions, we can really kind of screen and select context-specific germplasm that fits the environment, that fits the specific niche in terms of biophysical conditions, but also in terms of the farming system. And there is also a program that actually makes the crosses and does actual breeding. So what are some of the activities that are ongoing in the Alliance now, some of the new activities. So we've been having this selection and breeding going on. And currently there is a new activity that's really trying to tap into that agrobiodiversity that is available to us and that we feel has been sometimes underutilized. So we're really going through a process of screening the material, not only for deep-rooted grasses and legumes, but also for forages with anti-metagenetic, I can't pronounce that word, I'm so sorry, forages, properties. And then at a more downstream end, we've also we are about to launch a new Forage Africa network where we're really trying to bring together the forage breeders and the forage agronomists to kind of join forces around the science and the scaling of context-specific improved forages with a specific focus on sustainable livestock production. So these are the improved forages I'm talking about. So coming back to those forages and integrating them in a mixed system, they have really a strong potential to contribute to climate change adaptation as well as mitigation, but also actually really contribute to all the 10 elements that are kind of been pitched as the agroecology elements. And in the interest of time, I will not go through all the detail, but you can see here. We actually did a review about 2 years ago, a literature review, and found evidence for all of the different elements, so going from recycling and input reduction to contributions to animal health and animal welfare. Again, also already we've heard this earlier today about this. The improvement of the forages or the contribution to soil health, to the below ground and biodiversity and the macrofauna. It also often offers an opportunity to income diversification and social values and diets, fairness. Anyway, if you want to read more about that, this is an article that we published 2 years ago about the environmental co-benefits and how to tap into these improved tropical forages for the agroecological transformation. And we kind of really showed that there is an increased interest and an understanding of the agroecological dynamics of these improved forages if you integrate them in mixed tree-crop livestock systems. So what we propose as next steps is to continue selecting and breeding forage varieties that are tolerant to a wide range of biotic and abiotic stresses and are really targeted to specific niches in the farms and in the landscapes, thereby also, again, keeping that component of targeting them to niches that are where we expect less food feed competition in mind. We also do quite a bit of work around trying to increase our understanding of the multiple impacts of improved forages at farm and landscape level. So a number of activities around the quantification of the environmental trade-offs and synergies. And also quite some work more in the social science around what drives adoption of forages in which and what is needed to really support larger scale uptake of forages in the systems. And then in terms of really also so we try and do the evidence base or the evidence creation, but we also really try and influence policymakers and investors and also increasingly link with the agroecological, the regenerative agriculture, those communities, because they all actually do have an interest in livestock, and often it is the forages is a really nice entry point to join that community and join that kind of movement towards sustainable food production and defending also the role of livestock in there. So thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for some questions.
Thank you very much, Anne, for these very nice presentations. Are there any questions? I may start with the last point, saying labeling, promoting livestock products coming from sustainable systems. Is there a market in Africa?
That's a good question. I think there is a big market for livestock products. And there is some interest from certain actors to also make it sustainable, but this kind of payment for ecosystem services or the people that want to pay more for the organically produced livestock is very small as compared to the Western world. It is there, but it's very small. But I think the advantage of working around sustainable livestock production is that it often is a co-benefit of something that does speak to the farmer. So they really want to increase the efficiency and productivity, and sustainability is often a co-benefit of that.
Thank you, Anne. Philippe, please.
Yes, so thank you, Anne, for your talk. I appreciate very much. You mentioned this 23,000 forage varieties or accessions.
Accessions.
How do you manage the measurement of the traits, methane emission by animals? Because methane is not, I presume, not by the plant. Or do you have an in vitro system or for testing the variability between accessions?
So this is a very new project that I'm not personally involved in. So because it's such a huge work, we really had to wait or write a nice big proposal. So we are getting a decent amount of investment, and it's a collaborative effort between ILRI and the Alliance to really try and screen these forages. And I think it will be a combination of it's the plant, so we are screening the plants, and it's a combination of laboratory work. I would have to ask my colleagues for the details. Because
maybe this is not absolutely evident, but this could be a worldwide project. As this problem of methane is a worldwide question, maybe it will be interesting to try to mobilize funds from different origins. I don't know, from European Union, for example, from FAO or from other countries, because it's really a huge, nice project, and it's very urgent.
Yes, it is huge. So we got investment from the Bezos Earth Fund and Bill and Melinda Gates, and it is going to cut across different regions and bringing together at least a few CGR centers, and I'm sure we will also look out for further collaboration, because I think other partners have made progress and have with our insights to be learned. This is just about to start the project.
Okay, thank you very much.
And they're also, sorry, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to hear your presentation now, because this work has been going down to the end users, the stakeholders, the farmers, and to achieve more and more, I think R&D work needs to be exploited, is to expand the potential technologies to be in the hands of the farmers. So among your accessions, have you got the Napier grass, Pak Chong, we call? That's a species that has been worked extensively in Thailand and also in the region. It has been growing very well and producing both yield and quality of the grass. So if not, I would suggest you, to explore this variety, to include into your sessions. Secondly, to go forward, to expand this work on the R&D with the farmers. I think it's very important to have a cross visits, on the farms, to expand through the farmers themselves, to come and share experiences and learn from these successful farmers. This is the case that we've been doing here in the region in Southeast Asia that I've been, involving with, and I would be happy to share more information later on the use of these forages. And our emphasis would be more on the interaction of the legumes into the grass in order to increase the protein, as well as the fodder trees containing phytonutrients, as I mentioned. So it will be the great way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. So I think you mentioned Pak Chong. Yes, it's a big hype also in East Africa. And I believe it's a very nice material. The problem now is, and that's why we also working quite closely with the plant health authorities and the policy around the seed systems, because a lot of people are now actually promoting and selling Super Napier, Pak Chong, which we are not so sure if it is actually the same material. So this is one of the challenges we are meeting. But Napier has been big in East Africa for a while. This is a new variety that looks interesting. We also work quite extensively on different brachiaria accessions and bread materials. Panicum has been is getting very popular, and we are starting to experiment with grass legume mixtures, because that is something that is new, that for the longest time people didn't believe that the farmers were ready to take such kind of complex things, but we see such an evolution in the sector that now I think the time is also ripe for the grass-legume mixtures. And then, yes, in terms of scaling, we are really experimenting with many different modules. And one of the things we are doing is farmer-to-farmer exchange, which we believe is, I think we all know, we all like that. We believe when we see, so, and especially if you hear it from a colleague of yours. So, but we also actually do research on which is the more effective scaling approach.
Thank you very much again. Please give Anne a hand. Thanks a lot. And we move on.
So our next and last speaker this afternoon is Joshua Taylor. He told me, called me Bret. So Bret comes from Idaho, United States, in the city of, as French speaker, I would say Dubois, but I'm sure you don't say Dubois. And he works for the Agricultural Research Service in the US Department of Agriculture, and his presentation has two keywords: livestock farming and wildlife. Please, Bret, the floor is yours for 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I'd also like to thank the invitation to come out here and visit with you guys and share a little bit about what I was asked to, and that's looking at livestock-wildlife conflicts. And the original invitation was to also discuss predation. But I want to put it into the context and regionalize it to the western part of the United States as far as what we're seeing happen, and hopefully it could be used as an example of some of the extreme situations where we're seeing livestock grazing precluded from landscape because of wildlife conflicts, serve as an example for other people around the world. So first of all, we'll talk about challenges of managing livestock in areas where predators occur. The data that I'll be using is from the USDA NAHMS report. That's the National Animal Health Monitoring System. You can find this online. It's quite a wealth of information in terms of all factors that affect livestock production in the United States and result in death or disease. In that is contained, the data is also contained the predation, and that's what we'll visit about today. We'll also talk about some of the strategies that producers use to coexist with predators on the landscape to reduce predation. But we want to go, and I want to go a little bit beyond that and looking at beyond predators and livestock and looking at those factors that deal with the emotions around predators, as well as those that are listed as endangered and threatened in the United States, and how that is creating obstacles where coexistence, even though proven to work in some areas as far as predators and livestock producers on the landscape, are being done away with. And then I'll briefly talk on some of our approaches where I work and some of our research goals. So in presenting this data, let's start with looking at regional trends. So what I did is I grouped the states, and I mentioned livestock in the title, but we'll specifically talk about sheep for sake of time. And so what I have is I have regionalized, we'll look at what I call the Upper Mountain West. That will be around the Yellowstone National Park, for those of you that are familiar with that area. That includes Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Also, we'll look at the Great Lakes and Upper Midwest area, which is Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So I've pulled all of those numbers together in the survey, and then we'll focus specifically on Texas down by itself, which that's pretty much Texas always wanting to be by itself. So we'll group that accordingly. So now, this, if you look at this, this is the impact of predation on sheep. So as you're looking at these graphs, we have a graph on the left, a graph on the right. The one on the left is lamb death for the 2019 lamb crop for that year, as summed up for each one of those regions. On the right is the ewe death, so mature breeding ewes, and those numbers that died for any region. So each bar within each region is the total cumulative deaths. Now what I have is in the red, the lower part of each one of those bars are the deaths that are responsible or can be accounted for in terms of direct predation. So if we look at the Great Lakes area of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and compare that to Texas, what we see that both for lamb death and ewe death, and this can also much be repeated for the systems, the small ruminant systems with goats, we'll see some of the similar numbers, is that the death is relatively high on an annual basis, up near 15% for the Great Lakes region and up at 18% for lamb death in Texas. But look at the difference between the two, that we're in the Great Lakes region. Predation, although some people advocate that predation is a primary issue in terms of lamb death, in this region, both for the lambs and the mature livestock, predation is not much of an issue. There are other production inefficiencies that these systems experience that lead to death. Whereas we see the complete opposite for Texas. Texas is ravaged with predators and ravaged with all kinds of other things. But what we see is that that is a true case. And that is something that sheep producers and goat producers in Texas have to deal with. And it is costly for their particular systems. What's interesting, though, is we look in the middle there at Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Now, based upon public opinion, what we would think is that these regions would experience the most predation. This is where the North America iconic predators are: the grizzly bear, black bear, gray wolf, wolverine, lynx, bobcat. You can go on down the list. This is where it appears just on publicity that these animals would be concentrated, so we would automatically think that predation is greatest here. But no, we don't see that. We see that, yes, predation does account for the majority of lamb deaths in a year, but the overall death of lambs within those particular flocks is relatively low. So although predation is an issue, it's not at a level to where we see some of the issues that affect profitability like we see in Texas. So what are the predominant predators? If we look, I've listed the top predators that account for the majority of the predation in each one of these regions. And starting on the left with Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Iowa, bringing those numbers together and going across to all other regions, we see that the American coyote is the primary culprit. In fact, in each state, you can look at this in each state, you can sum all of the deaths due to predation from everything, from mountain lions to eagles to bears to wolves to ravens, feral pigs, or whatever it may be, and those all added together, except for the case of Texas, do not exceed what we see in terms of predation that can be accounted towards coyotes. One thing I do want to point out, and when you look across the data over the past 30 or 40 years, 30 to 40 years, and what we see, especially demonstrated there in Texas, is the amount of predation that's caused by dogs, domestic dogs. And you automatically think, well, maybe it's probably just feral dogs. It's not really feral dogs, and it's become quite an issue because the dog that's doing a lot of this predation is that dog down the road, that family pet that the family gathers around, the family loves. It's that golden retriever, it's a German shepherd, it's a Labrador retriever, standard poodle, whatever it may be, that nobody would suspect of causing this level of predation. But the reason I talk that it's a rising issue, it's not necessarily the number of pets, but it's the way that compared to 40 years ago when a predation event was happening with a pet, how that was managed compared to today. That's a whole different topic. So these animals are being tolerated to some point, and which continues to perpetuate the issue on down the road. But Texas does have a serious problem with predation from dogs. One thing I do want to point out is what I have in red. So over there in the left, I have wolves and eagles highlighted in red, also bears, eagles, wolves. This red indicates species, predator species, that are actually listed under the Endangered Species Act of 1973 in the United States and are managed accordingly, which I'll bring up in just a minute. It does cause a conflict. So real quick, just to pop up a picture of the primary culprits, American coyote. Beautiful animal, clever, the most clever of all of the predators that we see out there, but they do very well off of livestock, and they do very well off of your garbage. They can populate urban areas. You're most likely to see one downtown New York as you would out in the wilds near Yellowstone Park. So tactics deployed, how do the managers deal and how do they produce in these environments? First, let's look at the lethal tactics deployed. A lot of times when you talk about dealing with predators, a lot of people think, oh, we are going to use lethal means, but not so much, because when we look at that, again, we see the Midwest, Great Lakes region, their level of lethal control, which is primarily trapping, is about 7.2% of the producers use lethal control. Whereas we get into Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Texas, we can see that's up around 18%. So the non-lethal tactics deployed first on a national level, what's interesting and very encouraging is over the last 20 years, we've seen a tripling of the number of producers all the way up nationally as 80% of the producers investing in some lethal means to deter predators. This also indicates, as we'll show, what are those means is that we see producers not only getting into contact with their, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that producers are not paying attention to their animals. They are paying attention to their animals, but rediscovering new ways to understand their production systems and the environment. What's most important is that the environment that we're producing in, and those producers out there learning more and more about the species are there, and thus being more methodical or accurate, maybe I guess you could say, in their approach of choosing and testing new techniques of non-lethal control of predators, or deterrent. It's really a deterrent of predators. And fencing is one of the things that we've seen pop up quite a bit over time. And it's not the standard solid wall fence or the famed barbed wire fence that you see scattered throughout North America that so many wars were fought over, it seems like. It's actually the electric fencing that I think that's used all over the world. It's the affordability of it. The ability to put it up quick, because instead of being solid wire, many of this is a polywoven or a small mesh wire, polywoven into long strands. And it allows producers with neither that much strength nor skill to string these up pretty quick. And it's not necessarily to keep the animals in, it's simply to keep the predators out. So it allows some mobility that's effective and efficient. And a lot of these sheep production systems are in the backcountry, meaning they're only accessible by horses. So some of the new technologies regarding electric fencing and those things that deliver the electric charge have enabled these to be employed out in the remote parts of the United States. But as you can see, the top ones for all of the categories really is centered around livestock producers basically spending more time in coming up with their ways with their animals than being with their animals more 24 hours around the clock, or, I mean, taking time to check their animals when normally that they wouldn't, such as frequent checks and night penning. So one thing just kind of point out, I mean, we see Texas there again not investing as heavily as other states in non-lethal tactics deployed, but this just serves as an example of using these data to figure out and to recommend how and where to move in terms of decreasing predation. So to summarize the first part of my talk, predation is region dependent, and we've seen that. It's influenced by location, the environment, the management, the terrain, and the predators there. And despite the dogma that predation is the major factor in livestock death, other factors generally have a much greater impact, at least in the United States, for small ruminants than predators themselves. So overall, predation is manageable, but as we see, and what we're thrilled to see producers experience with is experimenting with, and that's new predation deterrent techniques, and especially the non-lethal ones. But the final thing is that I want to point out, the first part of this talk, is coexistence, meaning the presence of the predator in that environment, as well as the livestock producer. That's possible, and that coexistence is possible, but it's not only possible, it's being accomplished quite well. So to stick with the title, the abstract I had, and stick with the title of the talk and focusing on the U.S. West, this is actually our research flock, probably about, if you're familiar with Yellowstone National Park, this is about 40 miles due west of Yellowstone National Park. An incredibly diverse ecosystem and incredibly productive for both wildlife and sheep. But this would be a common picture of what you see in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming in terms of the large sheep herds in those particular areas. But you can see as that habitat in the background, it's certainly the prime habitat for some of the large carnivores. So the main issue, it really deals with a platform for multiple people to, I guess, have access to in terms of argument, in terms of debate, in terms of what lands that have, at least for the near time being, have been used for in terms of livestock production, what they should and shouldn't be used for. And it centers around the platform that allows people to stand on is the platform of public lands. And so to describe that real quick, what public lands means in the United States, these were lands that it's in the western part of the United States, but they were acquired primarily through purchases from France, Spain, Mexico, and Russia, and treaties with Great Britain in the 1800s. The federal government acquired these lands, which was millions upon millions upon millions of acres, and they did set aside some of that land to stay within the federal land reserve, And then by the late 1800s, early 1900s, what wasn't claimed by pre-settlement the entrepreneurs in the area, as well as set aside in special federal reserve, was then offered to the public for purchase. And that was the settlement. So when you watch the old Western movies out of the United States, they always talk about settlers. These are these particular people. But the point, what I want to say is that regardless, since about 1850, as the West was populated, livestock systems evolved with a codependency on access to federally owned lands. So the livestock producers would have private lands, and then they would have the public lands, and therefore those systems involved where they're almost inseparable. And if you do try to force the separation, what commonly happens today is if you uncouple that dependency, usually what private lands are left over by that producer are sold out for housing and backwood wilderness development with cabins and whatnot, which is a shame because this is leading to the degradation of some of the open, vast lands of the American West. So most of these public lands that I'm talking about are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, which is Department of Interior, and the U.S. Forest Service. They are mainly still in somewhat of a native state. They haven't been cultivated. They haven't been treated much. They maintain mostly native species, both flora and fauna. And they are managed for multiple use. The multiple use could be conservation. It could be energy development, timber, grazing, cultural purposes, whatever it may be. But the key thing is these management plans are subject to public review, public scrutiny, and public comment. So this is that public lands platform to where maybe 100 years ago, the cattle baron that had the 100,000 head of cattle out on the open west of the United States where they weren't affected by the public, well, these days, well, first of all, there's no cattle producers that size anymore in the United States, but even with that, is that these users of the landscape, the people that are grazing the landscape, are held accountable to the public as well as they're held accountable to that agency to accomplish that grazing within the Forest Management Plan or the Bureau of Land Management Plan. But these lands are important because they support rural economies, food and fiber systems, and other ecosystem services, including biodiversity and conservation. So this right here, just to give you a quick overview of what it would look like. So we have Minnesota and Iowa over here, which are not a part of what they call the public land states, whereas Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming are public land states. And you can see all of the white area, that's private land. So when we looked at the Great Lakes region, what we see is the majority of that is all private land, and this is the kind of the dairyland heart of America, and so it has systems and areas that look much like what surrounds Leon. But when you look over here at Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, you see very little white area, very little deeded area. In fact, those deeded acreages are scattered out through all of the colors are government lands. So here's Yellowstone National Park, for example, Glacier National Park. And we see the yellow is Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service is green. Those two colors of lands are what are managed for what are called public lands for multi-use purposes, where the national park is not a multi-use purpose, it's for a single use. But you can see how the evolution after settlement, as people moved into these particular areas, how their livestock systems depended on integration and use of those lands through part of the year. But the key thing is, and what we know of, is these are what people want to refer to as the wild lands of the United States, but this land out here houses most, if not all, of the iconic wildlife species of North America. And this is where the conflict occurs. So as we can see, sheep production, and if you look at the data over the past 20 years, in the United States has dropped about 26%. But different in the states such as Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and Utah, we see that decline has been about at 37%. And the reason comes down to the direct effect of species conservation having on how these lands can and cannot be used. One is that there's been extensive conversion of private-owned land, range land to croplands, rural housing, and degraded grasslands. And because of that, that was formerly habitat that wild species could occupy. But as that goes away to housing and cropland, we see that the last remaining lands in those areas are those federally owned lands. So it increases scrutiny on how those lands are to be used. And land management agencies are constantly pressured from certain groups, conservation groups that want to ensure the well-being of the animal that they're interested in on those particular landscapes. Make no mistake about it, these conservation organizations are not much unlike agricultural organizations, where many of these conservation organizations want to see these species increase for the sheer factor of hunting and harvest. So here's an example. The Endangered Species Act, passed in 1973, is the primary piece of legislation in the United States that drives how public lands, as well as private lands in some cases, can be used or can or cannot be used. So this is the number of large sheep ranches that are over 1,000 head in counties of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho that border the originally established conservation area for the recovery area of grizzly bears, which was implemented in 1975. That would be your green value, or excuse me, your brown value right here. And as you can see, as the implementation of the grizzly bear recovery plan was implemented over time, especially up to 1993, the number of large sheep farms as well as the population of sheep in the area remained about the same. But after some litigation in the court systems, and the litigation was saying that these land management agencies are not implementing the plans to the level that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service implemented, and then what happened there is it caused the closure of a lot of the sheep allotments, these allotments that people had developed a dependency for livestock production on. They were closed to sheep production. And it was all down to one statement. The statement was, through the court system, that sheep and grizzly bears cannot coexist. Sheep production and even cattle production cannot coexist with grizzly bear recovery or grizzly bears in the habitat. And this was an absolute statement with relatively no proof whatsoever. But it has created, and we see the loss of some of the prime sheep production regions of the United States. We see the loss of that. But the key thing is that philosophy has been further implemented onto other species that are not even listed as endangered, actually species that are quite populated around, is the fact that agriculture and wildlife cannot coexist, and being used as an absolute in development of land management plans. The issues that we're having in the U.S. West, and I hope this doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, is that the advocates, the extreme agriculturalists and the extreme environmentalists, are at the opposite end of the spectrum and refuse to meet. What that results in specific focus on a single outcome, further resulting in unrealistic or unachievable goals. Also, we see events of predation popularized to sway public opinion, both in the courts and legislative. But the other obstacle in terms of manageable coexistence is the continued loss of livestock on farms. It's a loss of public knowledge. It's a loss of livestock, or it's a loss of producer knowledge, local knowledge, cultural knowledge. People get used to not seeing the animals, whereas formerly people were used to seeing grazing livestock out there. They no longer see them out there. And after a generation passes by, if livestock introduction is needed on those particular landscapes, for instance, for the Forest Service to meet biodiversity goals, that's troublesome for people. That's like, well, livestock has never been there. And so we can't allow that to happen, whereas that's sad that we're losing that familiarity. And also lack of overall public education in terms of achieving manageable existence. I think, agriculture, especially in the United States, suffers from this, and it's their own fault of not educating the public. But especially in this case, educating about the importance of transhumant systems, the role of livestock in managing vegetation biodiversity, and also farmers and ranchers existing on the landscapes with predators, as I demonstrated in the early part of the talk. So to wrap this up, what's missing in this heated debate over the use of U.S. West vast public lands portfolio? Well, the key thing is that rangelands, as this whole day we've talked about and mentioned several times, rangelands are threatened by climate change, ecological uncertainty, and land use change. And it's unfortunate that these topics are not being mentioned in the litigation and the legislation that's focused around the public lands in the United States. And it's unfortunate. The way we see it and the way our research program is being directed under Dr. Haley Wilmer, who I have her cited at the bottom of the page, that works in our unit, land managers, conservationists, farmers, and ranchers must balance the trade-offs for these multi-use lands and balance the goals and adapt to climate and land use change impacts. Accordingly, work is needed to fill critical research gaps to support to support rangeland production and conservation goals through the development of science-based management frameworks, as well as effective science and co-production methods for living rangeland laboratories. So that's where we're at, and that's where we're going, and I appreciate your attention, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bret. Very interesting illustration of coexistence or non-coexistence of wildlife and livestock farming, and the opinion of the public on that. So we have place for 1-2 questions, no more, before. Please.
Hi, Claudia.
Claudia.
Ilri. I have a question about, you say that farmers are using more fencing now. And I know there's quite like some research going on now and some investment in invisible fencing. But it seems like you're going away from that. Because like for Africa, I don't see the point. We have the herders who stay with the cattle anyways. So they will be with our cattle. But like for you guys, I thought there would invisible fencing would make sense because of land defragmentation issues and so on. But it seems like you're going exactly the opposite way.
With the increase of fencing, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
But like I said, just what I'd mentioned, this fencing is that temporary fencing. It's electrified fencing. It may go one night or one day and then be gone the next. And so, and that is also based upon the extreme affordability, which that type of fencing, as of 20 years ago, was very difficult to not only purchase but difficult to transport. As well, as far as when we're looking at putting up 2 or 3 miles of fence or something like that.
But then do you think invisible fencing would be something that your farmers would be interested in? Just as because
forgive me.
No. You answered my question as well.
I'm hearing impaired in the left. I'm completely deaf in the left, so sometimes the reverberation. Okay, invisible fencing. So you're talking about the collars of fence. Okay, yes. No, that is picking up some headwinds as far as funding and capabilities, and especially the more satellites we get up there to communicate with these, as well as a lot of the virtual fencing in the United States runs off cell towers. So as the cell companies, again, expand their towers. But the Forest Service is heavily investing in that on some of their areas where they've had large land fires, to where the cattle, they're stringing a lot of the virtual fence collars on, and they're having quite a bit of success with it. Now, it doesn't remove humans from the environment. Those, what we call the range riders, the herders that get out there with the cattle, the cowboys, they still have to go out from time to time because you can't afford to collar the whole group of like 1,000 animals, but if they find the dominant one, or the dominant ones, they can collar about 30 or 40 of them and achieve the same result. So did that get closer? I'm sorry, I hope it did. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you again. I mean, we have the opportunity to continue the discussion with the final discussion. Thank you. Thank you. Stay with us, Bret. And we call all the speakers and co-chairing of the co-chair of this morning on stage, please. And Philippe will be the moderator of the final discussion. Please, Philippe.
Normally I have one slide here, but it's not appearing. So thank you very much for being on the scene. My idea in the last 45 minutes or 1 hour that it is remaining is that maybe we can have a general discussion trying to join the speakers and chairpersons to have a discussion about the 2 topics, one of this morning and one of this afternoon, control of greenhouse gas emission and biodiversity as a lever for sustainable animal production. I'm convinced that it is not very easy to do that, but I try to raise maybe 3 questions that we can deal in this 45 minutes. First, by asking to the speakers and to the chairperson to give their opinion, and then to ask you in the room if you have something to say on that. My first question would be around articulation between the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions Preservation of biodiversity. We hear a lot of things this morning and this afternoon between these two topics, but also with profitability of farms. And one question, one example that I can raise is a presentation done by Julian Chara, saying that are the silvopastoral system finally an example to follow in other countries and in Colombia or the countries where Julian mentioned. So I don't know if Jean-Louis or Anne can ask to some of the speakers to give their opinion on that question, that's this first question. Yeah, so there's only 2 microphones. Ah.
I'm going to be quick then. I don't know, I mean, for me, it seems that there's an elephant in the room in terms of biodiversity and climate, which has to do with deforestation, no? I mean, if we have to consider one big driver. And this relates to the type of feed you use, the feed efficiency, feed autonomy. So maybe going to the speakers in the morning, maybe Dominic with some figures at global level, how you include that, how you estimate that. We could start with that, and anybody else who wants to jump in.
Just to add, I will say more or less the same thing, but with overword. I think that this morning we discussed a lot about how we can mitigate ruminal emission. And to this aspect, there is no clear link between techniques to reduce ruminal methane and biodiversity. The link is when we think about reducing greenhouse gas in total, meaning also nitrous oxide. And in this kind, we try to link livestock and crop production, forages, trees, other sorts of crop. And in these senses, we have many levers which are win-win, both to reduce greenhouse gas and to improve biodiversity, at least agro-biodiversity, but not only.
Anne? Oh.
I can.
Yes.
I can quickly comment on deforestation. It's included in our assessment, and it's the way it works is if it's related to soybean production, the expansion of soybean production, it's included in the assessment, and it is mostly related to chicken feed in Asia. And of course, it's a bit complicated to allocate it again, and also in terms of timing, because once the forest is gone, then it's allocated once. And we have some sort of discounting to distribute the impacts over time. And I think here again, it's interesting that change is coming from consumers, because the feed industry itself wants to create some sort of labeling to make sure consumers know where feed is coming from, and make sure that consumers can make a choice to buy feed that is not related to deforestation. And I think there's now some people are working on this kind of certification for feed that links to or does not link to deforestation. And I think there's a lot of change coming from consumer awareness.
Do you have any other comment to do, Michel?
Yes, maybe a question not asked in the debate. Is a trade-off between ruminants and monogastric, and I think the debate is on the table, but not often explicit. And I mean, what is the future? For example, the question asked by Philippe, silvopastoral system. I can imagine that the pigs are living under trees like oak and what is the name? Châtaignier, chestnut trees, and maybe for poultry, I don't know. So, in the future, what do we imagine? Many advantages are for ruminants in biodiversity and use of non-edible food by people, but there is this problem of methane emission. But the question is on the table. What share between monogastric and ruminants in the future? And there is a trade-off or arbitrage to make.
Julian, I was impressed by the increase that you mentioned of 45% of productivity in your dairy farms in agro-silvopastoral system. Do you think that you just project a picture of in Denmark of pigs and a tree? Do you think that you can, maybe I asked the question already, do you think that you can complicate your system introducing monogastrics, introducing fishes, for example, or introducing other animal species, or?
Well, what I think is that it is a, you need to be open to that type of situations. I mean, from different perspective, and it's not necessarily easy for the farmer to get into that, but because if you are used to feed your pig only with concentrate that you buy somewhere, and that's a very simple way of coming and going. But if there are the possibilities of seeing all the integration and the benefits you got from that integration, that could be feasible. But it's going to be more complex to manage anyway. But I think that there is a moment in which we have to change the traditional way of thinking that all the pigs have to be fed with soybean from Brazil. I mean, if it is not doing well, and someone has to think and change the policy or the incentives to promote the systems that are more integral, that are causing less damage for the environment, and that could help other users like apple producers, for example. I think that's something that at the beginning in the tropics it was exactly the same. It was like, I'm not going to put trees here because I'm used to only having grass, and it's easy to manage it. But once you start seeing the benefits of that, now are the farmers who are willing to have trees because they know they are better for the cows because of the weather, for example. So that's something that can be changed if you have like a certain let's say perceptions change, and you try to also go somewhere in the system that allows you to do that. Organic farming is, for example, in some regions of the States, is like promoting more the use of these animals than to use any other way of weeding, and that could be an open opportunity for that.
Anne?
Sorry, Anne. No, I think you're saying a lot of interesting things, and to come back to the silvopastoral systems as a solution, I think it is one example of a nicely integrated system. So I think the solution, there is definitely not one solution, but there are some components, I think, that are in most of the solutions that come back, and it's an integrated system where land is coupled on, or the animal is still linked to the land, even if it's not spatially. Even if it's spatially disaggregated, we need to somehow close the nutrient cycle. So I think that is one of the components of a solution. There was another one that now skips my head, but yeah, this integrated system. And I think also another solution that everybody talks about anyway is the integration of trees also, and it can be in the form of a silvopastoral system, but there is a lot of agroforestry as silvopastoral system for me is an example of an agroforestry system in a way. So I think in that sense also the mixed systems and integrating not only forage trees there, but other trees in those systems is also a component that we have to think about more.
Can I just say a few words about what I see happening in Canada?
Yes.
In the last, I would say, decade, everywhere I go to do talks, we see this whole conversation about regenerative ag. We see this conversation about integrating the cropping and the livestock producer, getting them together. And some of the work we've done showed the benefits of having that animal, that ruminant on that acre of land a certain number of days per year. And so how do we do that? Because the cropping guys in Western Canada don't want anything to do with livestock. They get in the way of their GPS-powered tractors. And so we have to have that conversation and get that acceptability because we see livestock as an answer for that, that they're recycling nutrients. They're utilizing low-quality, high-fibrous feedstuffs. In fact, there's a program just been announced in a federal program called Living Labs. And it is integrating numerous BMPs, or best management practices, and some of those include fertility management, utilizing polycrops or cover crops, fertility management, and grazing management. So just to get more producers looking at those different BMPs, integrating them on their farms and their ranches, because they see the benefits of that. At the same time, we're trying to measure not only biomass, quality, we're also trying to measure emissions, whether it's direct with the equipment we talked about today or with modeling. So, you know, that 5-year program is there and they're talking about extending it to another 5 years. So, you know, there is that commitment. The producers obviously are compensated for participation in this program. So what comes out of it, we will see.
Thank you. I think it's interesting to see that you have also living labs. I didn't know there were living labs in Canada. I know that there are many in Europe at the moment. Huh? It's very interesting, but maybe just to jump on that to ask a question. So the living labs, the way I understand them, they are not only places where you experiment more holistic approaches, to jump on question 2, but also where you have more facility to measure, at least more maybe not equipment, but at least more access to measure some of the impact. Is there a way to know if in such system you measure greenhouse gas emission, maybe you can measure biodiversity impact? To what extent? And to link with the other part of the talks this morning in terms of breeding, what kind of animals are we talking about? Totally new animals then for such systems? Do we have to breed in order to reach those objectives in terms of greenhouse gas emission and biodiversity and tree integration? Are we going to have totally different animals, maybe no pigs and chicken at all anymore?
Yeah, I guess I can only speak to the ones I'm involved with, and so we're looking at the Living Lab is working with producers, and so when you work with producers, you have a challenge of replication. So you have to deal with that. You can use replication as different farm sites, but first of all, you need to take baseline measurements. You need to find out where you're starting from, and then 5 years from now, we can talk about soil carbon, soil organic carbon. We can talk about, you know, a better diversity of insects and songbirds and those types of things. In terms of looking at the breeding model for different types of animals, that may be something that's brought in later. But, you know, I see it as a good thing. You know, it is a lot of money, in my mind, to put towards demonstration type activities, but we as scientists think about replicated studies. And so I do see some of my colleagues trying to integrate that process going forward. So.
Just speaking about Living Lab, the first country is clearly Canada. Then we will have some contact between France and Canada to develop Living Lab, and now with Europe in general. And perhaps you don't know, but at European level, we will have a huge program, a partnership on agroecology, and this program will be based on Living Lab, just to have the implication of farmers decision makers, other decision makers, even startup, to develop innovative solutions for biodiversity, greenhouse gas mitigation, and some other aspects, hopefully not only for ruminants. The first step is to include livestock in the system, because at the beginning it was mainly crop, but now livestock is included.
At that stage, is there any question in the room? We take the microphone to put on the... So please come to the scene and ask your question or give your opinion.
Thank you. So thank you for this very interesting discussion. I have one comment on what we define as biodiversity, because there is a wild biodiversity, the domesticated biodiversity, and there are also the microbiomes. You are not talking so much about this diversity that is more and more important to consider for resilient systems. So I have one question for you. Do you consider that having biobanks of microbiomes would be very useful, because they are doing that in humans just to keep the biodiversity that they know has decreased? And for instance, in silvopastoral systems, it may happen that the microbiomes may be more diverse, but if there is a modulation of the rumen, as Diego, you mentioned this morning, maybe there will be a reduction. So I think it is a very important topic also to include in the preservation of the biodiversity, whatever the systems we have to develop. And it is a very plastic and dynamic type of biodiversity that is more or less a hidden biodiversity, and it would be very important to consider it in this type of discussion. So any comment on this are welcome.
Yes, of course, this is important. a huge domain. So please, we will take a second question and then or comment, and who will ask on the biodiversity of microbiomes? Jean-Louis? Jean-Louis, prepare your answer. But Diego, but maybe we hear the second question from the floor.
Hi, I'm Virginie Blanc-Villain from Canada. My question is more a comment about the link between greenhouse gas emissions and the profitability of the farms. Usually these guts together. And to me, the biodiversity would be splitted between ruminants and monogastrics. You were referring to edible proteins, and I think in terms of sustainability, the monogastrics, as you showed, Anne, are really much consuming these edible products. So on the biodiversity side, don't you think that we should better relate this with upstream what we do, the type of ingredients we use and byproducts, to affect indirectly the biodiversity for the monogastric, when on the ruminant side we should go more on that circular economy, integrating type of silvopastoral systems? Because I struggle imagining poultry or chickens being rebred and reselected to be resilient outdoor, and same for pigs. So should we approach the diversity in a different manner for ruminants and for monogastrics?
Okay, we will answer, maybe, I don't know who will answer to that. No other comments? So Diego, about biodiversity of microbiomes?
I can take the one on the microbiome.
Yes.
I know there are discussions on how to protect or keep this genetic resource. I see two problems with trying to conserve the microbiomes. One, I don't know whether we know to do that, and I mean the whole microbiota, at least in ruminants. And the second one is the money, that you have to have a source of funding that is, shall I say, permanent for a long time. The other option that I see that could be more feasible is consider the animals as a holobiont and conserve those several breeds in their local situations, using their local type of production systems, and keep those animals in their systems, and in that way is a way of conserving both the microbiome and the host genetic resource.
Jean-Louis? No?
Just to give another information, microbiome is clearly part of biodiversity at all levels, both animals, for sure, and we discussed this morning selection, so we can change something about microbiome. But when we consider the livestock, even pig and ruminant and poultry, we have the use of manure, and manure has a huge, huge effect on soil microbiome. If we have a soil without manure, the microbiome is totally different. The fertility of the soil is totally different. So considering the soil, I think that animals, manure, soils, and the link is microbiome is a very, very important topic for research in the future. Not only for the positive aspect, but also for the negative aspect, and for example, transfer of genus of resistance to antibiotics also, to microbes and so on.
So this is linked to the second question for me.
Yes.
How to develop holistic approaches. We speak a lot of the approaches at the farm level since this morning, but what about approaches, holistic approaches at regional and global levels? At regional levels, I mean, do we imagine to have connections between monogastric farms and ruminant farms, or do we put all species together? We don't speak too much on that, except maybe in the presentation on the non-OECD countries where this is the situation, in fact, that Anne, you present this afternoon. So how do you see that this holistic approach, more at regional and global level? Claudia?
It's not that much to say from my side to it, but like obviously we need to increase nutrient cycling, and that could mean the connection between monogastrics and ruminants, or it could be on a farm level. So different ways of nutrient cycling, right? So it depends on what system you're in, what is the existing system and how you can make that work. And I think there's a lot of Aranet had the call on circularity, so there are a lot of projects on the way currently that finish in 2025, so there will be a lot more answers to nutrient circularity and emissions. I'm not aware, but that doesn't mean there isn't, that it's also looking at biodiversity, because biodiversity is another complication which is difficult to measure that goes on top of it, right? And I think we're talking a lot of biodiversity looking at the silvopastoral systems right now, but then there's also the land sharing, land sparing argument that in the past, like people who run more of an intensive crop production will say this makes more sense because I get more per acre, and so I spare more land. So there's this whole, it's a bigger discussion in itself, and it may be depending on the system you're working with. And it does, to my opinion, it always depends on the environment that you're in, what's the carrying capacity, because we're never 100% efficient. And if we overburden the land with whatever agriculture measure we're doing, we're going to destroy the land, we're going to get environmental problems. We see that already in Europe, we see that already in the US, because we've been putting too much input, we've not been recycling nutrients, and we've just overburdened the land, and it couldn't compensate for whatever the nutrient losses from the systems were. And I think that is the most important to me, that we do that, and we do that within each system. So I wouldn't say there's one system that fits all agroecological zones, but really looking at each and how can we optimize with what we already have, because we can't change everything either. We can't now say, no, we need to change everything to this. We need to optimize where we're in. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe in addition to that, I think once you take it from that farm level, then you also need to talk always at least one spatial level higher, and then start thinking about the landscape interactions. So you have some kind of a nested approach where you go from farm to landscape and region. Yeah.
Michel?
May I shortly comment on the second question from our colleagues from Canada in Durham? And I think that the question is a very sensitive political question, because we argue that the legitimacy of ruminants is to use raw materials, feed that humans cannot eat, and that's difficult to argue in this way for monogastric, even if we try hardly. And I think that, according to my opinion, I was involved in pig production, in pig economics along my life, but my opinion is that the way to make the decision is a legitimacy of product and services by the production, and not the most important legitimacy is what we get as products and services, products useful for nutrition and health, and other services. And that's difficult to answer this question about the legitimacy of final products and services. But for me, that's the way to decide.
Yes, Julian?
I would like to point out a couple of things. One is that measuring efficiency, I mean, as when you go system per system or species per species, you end up trying always to be like independent and trying to be more efficient on your ground, and forgetting the second point I want to mention, that is the negative externalities. So when, for example, pig is being produced more and more in China based on more and more soybeans sent from Brazil, that externality is not taken into account. I mean, the externality of destroying some ecosystem in Brazil is not taken into account. So in this holistic approach, I think that the dimension has to be taken and that will make a break from the only economic perspective, and seeing it more in a whole perspective. And it is not an easy thing, because when you go to try to deal with deforestation in tropical countries, there is not only the productivity side, but there are also land speculation and many other things that come into the point and are hard to deal with. And even governments from those regions don't consider deforestation like a real big issue and somehow promote it or allow it. So it's a lot of things that you have to deal with in this sense. But I will agree that where the ruminants are more efficient, there should be like more promoted and trying to help in the cycle with the monogastrics too, because a good combination is important. But dealing with the production of protein based on non-food resources is very important for the efficiency.
Yes?
Just one comment. I think as systems have to become resilient because climate's already changing, a lot of your questions for number one and number two will have to happen. For people to survive, to be able to economically survive, to produce food, they're going to have to be resilient, which means they're going to have to adopt the things that work, and that's going to include potentially addition or more circularity, if you wish, with monogastrics and ruminants in the same system, and finding ways to preserve biodiversity. We have a fair number of people who actually use agritourism as a way of generating some dollars to preserve their lands and preserve biodiversity. So I think it's a lot of what we want to happen is maybe going to be a little slower, but I think building resilience is going to get to that.
Thank you. Is there any other point in the room? No? Yes, please. Matthias will give you the microphone and give your comment or question quite rapidly.
Hi, my name is Olga Moreira from Portugal, and just a comment regarding the 2 points discussed. Last May we had approved the living levy at the country level. Of course, Portugal is a small country. Regarding manure and livestock co-products in a basis of the Portuguese innovation agenda and the agricultural circular agriculture. And it joins pig and dairy cows farms. It involves manure valorization by different ways, from composting to bioremediation by insects. And also it has the application and the use of all those products. So it's a set of processes and products, and the valorization of all the products obtained at different cultures, from maize, grasses, and orchards. This is just an example. This was approved following an operational group of the European Union, of the AIP Agri, and this is the second phase for 3 years. It's just a comment, an integrated project with an holistic approach at farm level. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. Another comment from the room, yes?
Robert Hewitt from Australia. I've probably got 2 comments and a question, or the other way around. I come from a land of droughts and fires. So first question is, how's your silvopastoral system going to survive 4 years of drought and then fires afterwards? My other comment is the fact that there's quite a few production systems in the world that don't actually use corn soy in their monogastric systems. And our human edible to protein ratios are less than 1 already. And the third comment is, I'm listening to all this and wondering, what on earth are the poor going to be eating? Because I can't see any of this actually reducing the cost of food.
Who want to comment that, or any? Yes, Anna?
Maybe a question back to you. So what's the option then in your case? I mean, there are other systems, there are a number of, we're talking about basically diversification of sources of income or of species on the farm for better resilience and better climate and biodiversity outcome. There are systems where this is not possible, what you just explained in Australia, but I'm thinking also pastoralists in the Sahel, very little margin for diversification. What's the option then?
I think there's multiple options. I think this is a suitable option, but I think some of our intensive systems that we're already utilising work very, very well. Yes, there's improvements that can be made, but it's not, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater with some of these systems. There are minor tweaks that can be done to do things. Big changes, yes, they work in some systems, but they're not going to work everywhere. Monogastric systems can utilise everything. Australia, we have the luxury of using processed animal protein still. That's a major way of getting non-human edible protein into monogastric systems that is no longer allowed in a lot of countries and can safely be done. So recycling, upcycling, those things really need to be looked at, and looked at in a way that's going to work.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to finish with a third question, because we have now only one presentation on wildlife, and this may be too ambitious, but what are the links with of the preceding points with wildlife and more largely nature? Are we able to develop these systems with wildlife, within wildlife or not? Or all these systems, a majority of them in reality are dealing with a relationship with wildlife, in Africa, elephant or chimpanzee, or so is it really possible to do that? Maybe Bret could give an opinion on that. What do you think? If you go out from the US, what do you think on that? Is it possible to develop integrated system and having good relationship with wildlife or not?
I hope I can address that. I think, and what the time didn't allow for to touch on as far as when I was just looking at the predator numbers based on those surveys and the predation. The point I wanted to make is that across the United States in several different systems, both on private lands and both on these public lands, and realizing that the United States is still relatively young in terms of occupation of those lands, you know, post-industrial age. And so, therefore, the wildlife on those landscapes is still relatively present, and we can certainly thank Canada to the north of still maintaining a high population of the native wildlife. And so I think, and what I wanted to try to demonstrate from the survey is that indeed livestock production is going on, and the wildlife are thriving quite well. In fact, there are some issues that agriculture, at least cropland agriculture, has caused a shift in wildlife balance. So not necessarily that the cropland agriculture caused wildlife to go away, but it certainly gave an uphand advantage. The white-tailed deer is one of those that, when you look at the historical documents of the early settlement days, as people were tilling the lands, they were bringing livestock, whitetail in some of the areas, the white-tailed deer was not seen too often. And now, insurance companies are legislating in states to try to get a reduction in whitetail numbers because of the number that are run over and the number of payments that they have to pay for on vehicles. So my point is that I think in the agriculture, especially the livestock, there are plenty of examples where we see coexistence, where we see biodiversity maintained, where we see agriculture producers really taking stock and taking note of what do the wildlife require on this landscape to persist. Because somebody also mentioned some of the tourism. And so the Western livestock rancher does make quite a bit of money off of selling hunting for a number of different species that are allowed to be hunted in that particular state. So it is to their advantage in order to produce their livestock in such a manner, which includes genetics, which includes rotational grazing, which includes maintaining the vegetation biodiversity. It's to their advantage to do that at a level that maintains those species for tourism. Did I even get close to what you asked, I hope?
Any comment on that, or specific comment?
Can I ask a quick question? Is there an optimum in terms of wildlife numbers and sheep numbers, and then, you know, optimizing also emissions and maybe even biodiversity? Are you thinking about an optimum number of animals in these systems to interact with wildlife and all the other co-benefits?
Well, I'm, again, not really going to be able to hit that because I'm not near at the level of expertise as this entire group on that. At least in the U.S. West, wildlife numbers are managed by each state, and the agencies that are in charge of managing these numbers are the agencies that deal with and issue out the hunting. So to hunt all of these different wild species. Therefore, when you talk about emissions with wildlife, well, that's not counted on that credit. So these wildlife agencies set optimal numbers of wildlife in the area. In fact, Idaho is one of, if you go to the Idaho Fish and Game website and look at their elk management plan, you can see goals of populations of elk that they want set. Those goals dictate also how many wolves, gray wolves, that they're reasonably going to tolerate in those environments, so they will increase the harvest of wolves in certain areas in order to increase like moose and elk populations, where in other areas where elk are far beyond the objective, then they reduce the number of tags that's harvested with wolves. And this is why a large lawsuit has started with Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the federal government, related to grizzly bears and trying to delist grizzly bears. So when we go back to livestock like sheep, there really is no targeted number because the sheep industry in the United States is only 3% of what it was in 1890, which it was 65 million. Now there's only 3.5 million. So as far as regarding emissions and things as a national contribution, sheep and goats contribute so low to that total, which is occupied by beef, cattle, and dairy. Yeah, so.
Claudia, want to say something about that?
I wanted to go to to a topic with the wildlife and livestock, there's also a health aspect that we need to consider. Because I think for Colorado, for example, there is a wasting disease that they believe was transmitted from actually livestock that was at the university to the deer population there, if I remember right, and the animals are dying. And I also know that we also have in Kenya, I forgot what disease it is, that is spread from, because we have also wildlife and the livestock mixed in the rangelands, right? So we will also have in certain areas where the wildlife will spread disease to the livestock, and we see more disease, like death through that. I'm not a veterinarian, but I think I'm happy to see these systems, but it's something to keep in mind, because these transmissions are possible. And especially if we have transmissions from our livestock to wildlife, and the wildlife may not be able to handle it, and then it like actually kills a huge population, that would be very sad to see, yeah? And that may be more possible if we have more like close, intensive livestock populations where we get more of a disease development as well.
Thank you. Before asking you to go to the cocktail, I would like to close this session, and first, before closing, first to thank the speakers for their participation. To thank the chairpersons also for their active participation. And to thank everybody for being here until 6:15 Sunday, which is not so evident. Thank you very much, everybody, and we can go now to the cocktail. This is a closure of the session. Thank you.